Adam, welcome to the show, man.
Thanks for having me, Justin.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited for this conversation just because you've done some really cool stuff in the entrepreneur space. You are living a very interesting life for so many people in the entrepreneur world. We can dive into that. But happy New Year, first and foremost. We're on the second day of the New Year as we're recording this. It won't come out for a couple of weeks. But I want to ask you this question because I've noticed in the entrepreneurial world, we have this great debate of should you set a New Year's resolution? Should you not set a New Year's resolution? I don't know why it's become a debate for people, like let people live. But I'd love to know, are you a resolution person or are you not a resolution person?
I'm more of a goals person. Like I set all my goals, so I know exactly what I want to accomplish from a personal and business standpoint, but not so much a resolution guy.
Yeah. So what are you looking forward to most in 2025?
I think the potential of what could come. Like what I love about a new year, and like, look, you could turn the page anytime. I feel like it's your point. Like I think some people hate on the New Year's resolutions because they always say, well, you could have a New Year's resolution in June if you want to. And it's like, yeah, that's true. But what I'm a big believer in, whether it's setting goals, journaling, whatever the hell it is just about what can help you get to what you want to get, what can help you accomplish the goals you want to accomplish as quickly as possible. So, yeah, for me, I'm excited about the untapped potential that could happen in 2025. And there's a million different things million different directions, I should say, that we all can go in. And what I think is always cool is looking back at, hey, 2024, how that ended. I didn't expect A, B, and C to happen. So that gets me excited about 2025 and what could come.
Yeah, dude, I love it. So I run a mastermind of entrepreneurs, and we do in the beginning of the year, we say, what are your goals? And at the end of the year, I review them and I go, like, where are you at? And we realize so many of them did not end up where they thought they were going, but they ended up in such a better place because they were able to pivot and move and do all those types of things. And I think that's kind of the superpower of a true entrepreneur is being able to pivot and being able to accept, okay, maybe that's not the direction I need to go into. And I imagine that's something with your business that you've done from the beginning, being able to kind of take a look at the world and say, okay, here's why I have to pivot. So why don't we talk about who is Adam today? What are you doing today? And then we'll break down how you got there.
So I run a company called Email Outreach Company. We do cold email outreach for startups all the way up to Fortune 500s to get them on more sales appointments.
I love it. So obviously, how long you been in business?
We started this company just over 3.5 years ago.
Okay. And so obviously last year was an important year. Like I always look at like the third year of business being like, okay, are we sink or swimming? Is this the direction we're going? Did you see any pivots last year at all in your business?
Less pivots, more growth. Like there was new tools we added. So for example, we had always been a cold email agency, but one of the things I would constantly hear, because I would do a lot of coaching with startups and small businesses as well, is how do I create a successful newsletter? And I always had my best guess of how to do it, but I didn't really know because I never truly built a successful newsletter on my own. So me being more of a digital nomad, we stumbled across a newsletter business called the nomadcloud.com. And we ended up buying that business in the beginning of January of last year, January 2024. And then we built that newsletter from 5,000 subscribers to 250,000 subscribers. We took the revenue from nothing to, not a ton of money, but 6, 7 grand a month. And then we ended up selling that business just a few weeks ago. So the end of 2024. And the beauty of it was not only like, look, we had a 17x return on buying and selling that business within a year, but more importantly was we learned the newsletter business. So from that, we have some pretty big customers now that we're building out successful newsletters for. So I'd say that's less of a pivot and more of just a thing that naturally happens in growth, right? Like no matter what industry you're in, the more successful you get, the more you learn about it, the more products that tend to sprout out from it. So I would say that was probably the biggest, pivot, if you want to call it that, in my business last year.
Yeah, for sure. And I think it lends to the idea of like always being curious and looking to grow and adjust who you are, not only just in business, but as a person as well. So, obviously, let's talk a little bit about cold email outreach. Now, most people are going to hear this that aren't in the world of entrepreneurship and outreach and go, oh God, I hate cold email outreaches. First of all, it's a really difficult thing to get right. Most people get it wrong, not only from a standpoint of, and I'm sure you'll get into the technical side of it, like bounces and who's actually seeing it and so on and so forth. But beyond that, the way you're communicating is super important, right? A cold outreach isn't terrible if they're doing it the right way. You're on this podcast because of a cold outreach. And that's just the reality. And people know that have listened to my show for so long, they know I don't accept many pitches, right? But I was just fascinated with the way that you approached it. Talk a little bit about how you view cold email outreach and like some ways that you guys do it a little bit differently to make it more effective for your clients.
So the way I view cold emails first is understanding like what this thing actually is, because to your point, there's a lot of people that look at cold email and get kind of the ick about it. And look, I get it because we all have our inboxes stuffed right now with horrible cold emails. So I get why we don't like it, and that's why that's our natural instinct. But for me, whenever I look at cold email, it's just about connecting person A to person B, whatever that use case is, whether it's to get on your podcast like we're doing right now, whether it's getting new customers, whether it's getting investors, whether it's getting advisors, whether it's finding the company that's going to buy your company, no matter what it is, it's just connecting person A to person B. And the reality is you just have to understand who that other person is that you're reaching out to. What problems may they be facing? How can your solution tie into helping them with that problem, add value to their workday, whatever that might be? And that's really the bottom line. And when it comes to what we do, I always tell people like everyone's always looking for that silver bullet when it comes to cold email. And the reality is, especially now, and the cold email world has changed a ton over the last 15, 16 months. Anyone that's in it knows how difficult it's gotten and how much complexity now is in it today. But there is no silver bullet. Everything that we do is about giving it a 2 to 5% lift, whether that's infrastructure related, whether that's list related, whether that's copy related, and everything in between. It's all about giving yourself a 2 to 5% lift, which will get you the results that you desire.
Yeah, and let's talk a little bit about those difficulties. I mean, even just for my own email list send out, like we're not talking cold email. These are people on my list. There's a total shift in how people are receiving it. It's almost like multiple steps just to make sure people are getting your email, so on and so forth. How do you handle that at scale? Because you're sending out thousands of emails for people a week.
Yeah, the key is around the infrastructure today. That is the biggest shift because Google and Yahoo and Microsoft and all these different providers have gotten really smart about what's a cold email, what's spam, and what they want to keep out of inboxes and put into spam. So, like in the old days, during my first tech startup, we could send out thousands of emails even a day from our main domain, no problem, as long as we could do a few things right. The first 2.5 years or so of email outreach company, when we would work with our clients, we would create about 1 or 2 domains and maybe a handful of email inboxes that we would send from. And that was okay as long as you did everything else right. Now we have some customers with about 1,500 inboxes that we're sending from. Yeah, because you can't send any more than 20 emails per inbox per day. And if your potential universe of customers is large, the only way to get to as many people as possible, as quickly as possible, is if you have a large infrastructure built. So that's really step number one. And that's where a lot of people struggle, is setting up the infrastructure that will allow them to scale their email outreach.
Yeah, how'd you get into this business? Because I know you weren't always an email guy. Like, what made this so intriguing for you? Like, what was the jump into the email world?
During my first tech startup, which I had for about 5 years, I sold that company in 2019. And there was a million things that we did wrong as a startup. But one of the things that we did very well was getting new customers. And we got some of the biggest brands in the world as customers: Bank of America, Amazon, Apple, Goldman, Disney. And how we got just about all those customers was from cold emailing them. So when I sold that company, I started to do a lot of work advising different startups. And just one of those tech startups I was advising just said to me, "Hey, man, can you talk to my head of sales? She's really struggling to get meetings on the books." I spoke to her and saw there was a big gap with their cold email and what they could be doing. I called up my co-founder of my previous startup. I told him about it. He said, "Oh, it's funny you say that. I'm advising the company that bought our company and building out a cold email system for them." So he said, "Hey, why don't we just get a couple of customers and see if this thing has any legs?" And, we're 3.5 years in and over 125 customers later and, trying to go strong.
Dude, I love it. And, and I think that that's the ultimate nod to what entrepreneurship is, right? See a problem, fix it for people, and doing it the right way. Talk a little bit about the tech startup before. What were you guys doing and how did you land those big clients? Because most people would think, okay, you're not getting Disney and Google through a cold email. Like, that sounds wild to me when you said that.
Yeah, it's funny. Like we were so young. Like I started that company right out of college. I did a 1-year MBA program, started the company 3 weeks before it. And, so I always tell people I was a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed entrepreneur, and that was probably for the best because you don't know what you don't know. So you just assume anything is possible. So it was a college recruiting startup. So we ended up building a technology. So it's a platform of about 100,000 student organizations from across the country. Think like engineering clubs, business clubs, et cetera. And then we would work with some of those employers I mentioned earlier that wanted to recruit students through their student organizations, as well as to get data on them. So they would host a lot of surveys through our platform. And then, yeah, we got just about all of our customers through cold email. We raised money, but not a ton. So we didn't have a big marketing budget. We didn't really have any connections in the space because, again, we were starting it fresh out of college. So we had to get scrappy. So, yeah, email was how we did it. Like, even a good example to show what's possible is we landed MasterCard as a customer from cold emailing. Now he's their former CEO, Ajay Banga. I believe he's the president of World Bank currently. He got on multiple phone calls with us through a cold email. He ended up passing us to a CHRO. They ended up buying our software. So, like, that's the level of what's possible through cold email if you can do it right.
Yeah. And again, I mean, most people are doing it wrong. Now, with your company, are you guys helping your customers formulate the messaging, the wording, all that stuff? Like, are you guys soup to nuts doing everything for your customers? Talk a little bit about the process.
Yeah, so for we call it full service customers, basically customers where we just do everything. We're an extension of their team. We do everything. We book the meeting. They show up to the meeting. We're doing it all. That's where we work with companies at product market fit stage, from startups all the way up to Fortune 500s. And then we also have a DIY offering for earlier stage startups. Basically, we build the infrastructure, we train them, we help them with copy, we hold their hand through the process. But then someone on their side needs to be running the campaigns.
Sweet. Yeah. And I think that, like, obviously, depending on where you at, I think anytime you're in a business and you're like, okay, we're ready to scale, we're ready to grow, that's when kind of investing in yourself really matters, right? You're like, okay, it's like the sink or swim moments in life. And you guys are really, for a lot of people, when you're talking about the startups, you're a sink or swim moment for so many people. When you talk to these customers, what type of hesitations are you seeing them have, and how can you kind of work them through that?
Well, one of them is, you mentioned earlier, not everyone is a believer in cold email. I was at a GTM conference in Austin a few months ago, and during one of the talks, there was somebody who spoke up and just tried bashing cold email and went on like a 5-minute soliloquy during the talk saying how bad it is. I spoke up and shared the other side of the story, and I had a long line of people that wanted to talk to me because they wanted to hear about solutions, not problems. But that is definitely one of the things, is some people just have this bias against cold email. Now, typically those types of people, I don't bother, quote unquote, selling to, because it's like, look, if you're not a believer, like one of my favorite shows is Mad Men. And I remember them pitching Don Draper, the main character, who had an advertising agency, and the potential client was all against what he was sharing. And he just stopped the meeting. He said, look, I'm not trying to sell you anything. Let's end the meeting. And that's kind of how I feel when people are just totally against cold email. I'll educate you on what we're seeing from ourselves. We'll educate you on what we're seeing from our customers, but I ain't trying to convince you of something that you don't believe in. So that's one of the pushbacks. And then number two is, the reality is there's a lot of crap in my space. There's a lot of bad lead gen companies that overpromise and underdeliver. So I love speaking to people that have worked with firms like mine in the past, but sometimes that can give people pushback. Hey, I've had bad experience in the past. I've been burned in the past. And that could have them a little more skeptical too.
Well, how do you guys find the right people to contact? Is, like, I always look at it from a standpoint of like, okay, cool. Like, so I own a company called Pod Brand. We reach out to podcasters, we help them build out their brand and help them grow their show and their reach, and et cetera, et cetera. My thought process is like, okay, I know I can go to this event that has 2,000 podcasters there. I know I can go over here where there's another 1,000 podcasters, and so on and so forth. But how do you go on the internet and go, okay, these people here, like, obviously you contacted me knowing I'm a podcaster. You go, how do we source X amount of people over and over and over again to make this sustainable business and keep these clients running? And contact them. What type of, you guys using a software for this? Is there, like, how do you guys do that?
Yeah, there's a lot of different ways to get lists. Like, some people use like the Zoom infos of the world. The nice thing about it is the data is good. Bad thing about it is it's pretty expensive. Then there's other tools like Apollo or Instantly, where you can get pretty high quality lists for not a lot of money. And then there's some vendors you can hire to get more complex lists and everything in between. The key is, the more clear you are in your ICP on your ideal customer, the easier it is for you to go after more of those folks. So, like, I'm crystal clear on who my ICP is. My team knows how to go after them, what type of messaging to use. And we just have a system that's constantly running, sending thousands of emails a day to book meetings with me. Even getting this meeting booked, like, there's many sources to get podcast contact information. So my team knows to download those lists. My team knows how to clean those lists. My team knows how to filter out podcasts too, because I don't want to get on podcasts that are new, that don't have a lot of listeners. So my team is filtering lists so that it's only going to be great podcasts like yours that are actually worth my time, versus brand new podcasts with, maybe 3 listeners.
Yeah. So obviously efficiency is key. And I think, especially in the startup world, People need that, right? It's a little different conversation when you're talking to those Fortune 500 companies that you guys work with. What I'm guessing you didn't day one start working with Fortune 500 companies. I'm sure at first it was the startups. When did you make the leap into working with the Fortune 500 companies, and how does that conversation differ? Because I think a lot of times people want to level up, but they don't quite know how to adjust and have a higher level conversation.
Yeah. So one thing I want to make clear is like we never focused on Fortune 500s. That was more fell into our lap, and then we said, yeah, great, let's do it. But that's not really my focus. The reason why is because of some of the red tape and bureaucracy. I love kind of that sweet spot of like 100 to 300 employees. That's my ideal target because a lot of the calls I get on, it's 30% of our customers are just about close within one day, about 45% of them close within 10 days. So that's like my sweet spot. I don't like these long sales cycles. So I'd rather work with people that if they want it, they see the value in it, they can move forward quickly. But when we made the switch from the early stage startups, like think sub 10 employees to 100 employees plus, that was about 18 months ago. And the reason why is because one, as anyone who knows anything about startups knows how finicky startups can be. They're in business today. 3 months later, they maybe are not in business. We would run into some situations where we would get some of our customers, 100 or more meetings over 4, 5, 6 months, and they would maybe close one of those deals. Versus some of the further along companies, they know their close rate really well. They know if they get on, 10 calls, they're going to close one of those. They know one deal equals X amount of ACV, which equals Y amount of LTV. Like it's just a math equation for them. So that's part of the reason why we switched from the early stage startups to a little more established companies, while also having a product that can work for startups just to be more of a secondary offering for us.
Yeah. So you mentioned earlier that you got into entrepreneurship right out of college, right? So super young. Was entrepreneurship something that always spoke to you, or was it something that like you're like this opportunity presented itself, so I said yes? Like for me, I knew at a young age, I didn't become a full-time entrepreneur until I was 30, but I knew at a young age that I was not fully employable. Like I'd have a job for like 5 years and I was like, get me the hell out of here. Right. And so like, is that something from a young age, like that's what I want to do?
I'm pretty sure if you interviewed me as a freshman in college and you said, what does the word entrepreneurship mean? I'm like 50-50 that I wouldn't even know what the word meant. So that was not like something I set out to do. I was a sport management major in college. I was wanting to be a GM of a sports team. Like that was always my dream. Until my junior year of college, I took an entrepreneurship class, and then I fell in love with it. My professor was amazing. She was starting an entrepreneur program at my college the following year. My college had to do different internships. So I applied to be the first intern of that program to build an entrepreneur program at my school. I was hired to do that. My senior year went well. They asked me to get an MBA while continuing to work for the school. So a free MBA, continue building the program. I did that. And then that was when I was like, okay, I can't work for a company. I was offered a pretty lucrative job coming out of college. And I said, nope, I'm going to start my own business. And yeah, the rest is history.
Yeah, it paid off, right? It's all worked out in the long run, especially, which kind of shifts gears, by the way, talking about being a digital nomad. We had mentioned how there's another local podcaster in my area named Brad Wiseman, and you happen to be on his show as well, which I think you are probably the only shared guest between him and I. So shout out to Brad real quick. I believe he changed his show name to just the Brad Wiseman Show. So if you guys want to go listen to that, give him a shout out there. But with that being said, like, when you talked to him, you were in Germany, and now you're in Austin, but you're about to head out to Hawaii. What was it about the nomad life that called to you that you just wanted to hop around and live in different places?
I would say in the beginning, there was really nothing about it. It was very much like a lot of these things, kind of happenstance. So what I mean by that is my co-founder, once we sold the company, I moved out to Hawaii. He started traveling the world. And when I sold the company, I started to advise startups. I also worked on a few real estate projects in upstate New York as well as Vermont. So I was living in upstate New York at the time. This is 2020, 2021 COVID time. We had started email outreach company in the middle of 2021. And my co-founder was in Florence, Italy at the time. And my lease was coming up in New York. And he said, hey, man, why don't you come out, crash on my couch for a month? We'll figure out this business, email outreach company, see if it has any legs to it. So I thought I would go to Florence. I thought I would come back from Florence, I thought I was going to get in my car, drive cross country, and meet up with my girlfriend at the time, I should say, now my ex-girlfriend, who was living in California. And 1 month in Florence led to 3+ years on the road, just going place to place. But what I loved about it was the freedom of it and the opportunity to really learn what it's like in the world. Because I think we all can get kind of stuck in our shelters, thinking that where we are is where it is all over the world, and our perspective can be kind of limited in that approach. And that was me to a T. My first startup, I was in Boston. And when I say I was 7 days a week in the office for 8 to 14 hour days in the office, almost every single week would be an understatement. So I was the opposite of the digital nomad type. So the past 3 years of traveling really opened up my mind, really helped me see where do I want to live? How are other cultures? What do they value? What do they not value? So it's been a heck of an experience for me to do that.
Yeah, how are you able to manage your schedule, right? And I think this is a fascinating conversation because when I tell people I work 2 to 3 hours a day, they like fall out of their chair. But the realization of it, number one, it wasn't always like that, right? I was the guy burning the midnight oil. I felt like if I wasn't working at 8 a.m. and 8 p.m., like I wasn't an entrepreneur, like that type of thing. But then I structured my business around like I want to live my life first and then work is second. How did you approach it differently to now you can be a digital nomad in any time zone, still get the work done that you need to get done, but also obviously enjoy these places that you're traveling to?
I've gotten pretty strict with my schedule. Like when I first went out to Hawaii, I remember somebody booked a meeting with me at like 3 a.m. Hawaii time. And I was like, well, they booked a meeting. I got to take it. So I woke up at probably, I don't know, 2:30.
You're a better man than me. I'd be like, hey,
Yeah,
we're gonna have to reschedule this one.
exactly. Well, that's what I do now. So
Yeah.
yeah, I got a cup of coffee ready. I was all ready for the meeting. I'm like, awake, let's go. They don't show up. And then I've had enough of those experiences where I'm like, nope, if I'm in Italy, I'm going to take meetings in the afternoon, or sorry, in the morning EST, because they're 6 hours ahead typically of Eastern Standard Time. When I'm in Hawaii, I'm only taking meetings in the morning EST, PST, same thing. So I've gotten pretty picky about my schedule. And look, I am a little bit fortunate. Like there's not like there's a boss that's saying, Adam, you have to work on East Coast hours. So I definitely do have that privilege being an entrepreneur. But for me, I've gotten very tight with my schedule. And look, if I'm in Italy, then I'm probably going to be working a little bit later. My days are going to finish up later. I'm also going to sleep in a little bit later. If I'm in Hawaii, I'm probably going to get to bed a lot earlier. I'm going to wake up a lot earlier. So you just have to react wherever you want to live. That's where you have to kind of adjust your time schedule and your calendar to do so.
Yeah, I remember early on in the podcast, I had interviewed a guy who lived in Israel, and I took the interview at like 1:30 in the morning, or it was like 2 in the morning or something like that. And there's 0% chance that that would ever happen now. But like, it's also it's understanding like where you stand in like the layers of what entrepreneurship is, right? Like back then I was like, I'll interview if you've done something impressive and you want to come on my show, I will bend over backwards to make sure it happens. And now it's just like, okay, hey, here's my calendar, find a time. And that's the time that you can allot and find time for yourself. Right. And I think that a lot of people miss that. They miss the idea that like they have to take care of themselves first. Because if they're not going to be worth much to anybody else. So I want to ask you a question that I ask everybody on this show. It is a two-part question because we are talking about the successes you've built, and I've interviewed some of the most successful people in the world. So the question is in the first part of the question is what's your definition of success. The second part is what are 3 things you do every single day to ensure that success for yourself?
Yeah, it's a great question. For me, success is just if you can reach the best version of yourself, you are successful. And your best version of yourself is not just professional, it's not just personal, it's all of the above. It's your fitness goals, it's your relationships, your romantic relationships, it's your family relationships, your friendship relationships, work. What do you have a clear goal on where you want to get to? Are you getting closer to that goal? Doesn't mean you need to hit the goal every single year. So a lot of that is how I look at success. And then in terms of what are the top 3 things I do every day, number one is journal. I think for the last, I don't know, 4 or 5 years, I have a pretty in-depth journal that I'll do at the end of every single day where I ask myself, what do I love about what I did during the day? What did I learn from the day? What can I improve upon? What are just some thoughts that I have about the day? And then what's a question I can ask myself? It's been a really great way to hold myself accountable every day, but also to make sure that I never lose the value in a day. Because if we don't write it down, we're never going to remember it. Every minute that goes by, every day that goes by, we're less likely to remember it. But if you said to me, hey, Adam, go check out, like, do you remember what you were doing on November 17th, 2021? What were you thinking? What were you doing? How were you? I could go to my journal, find everything about that and see where I was.
I
Was I
love
in
it.
Italy? Was I doing well? How was I doing? So that's one thing. Number two is I've always struggled with my sleep, and I've always probably underappreciated my sleep. And I try my best now to get 7.5 hours of sleep every night. I don't always do a good job of it, but I have noticed just how much more clear I am when I do that. So that would be the second thing. And then the third thing is I do try to be active every day. I try to work out really every day, even if working out just means going on a walk for 1 or 2 miles. But your mental health is tied to your physical health. And at least I know for me, if I have a week where I'm, drinking a bunch or eating crappy food and not working out, everything suffers. So I do try to take care of my physical health as well.
I love it. You should actually look up when it comes to the sleep. There's a woman who's a friend of mine. She's a sleep expert. She runs a company called Sleep is a Skill. She's actually in Austin, her and her husband. Her name is Molly Eastman. So look her up. She obviously helps people fine tune everything that they're doing, and she's incredible at what she does. Like I would say number one in that kind of sector. But because I said that, I lost my train of thought of what I was going to say next. But look up Molly. Her husband's really cool too. They're in Austin. I think you guys would vibe really well. But with that being said, I wonder, because you've done so many great things. You've built multiple companies. You've continued to help other companies scale and grow and continue to make more money, which is great. But I want you to picture yourself at the end of your life and all that has disappeared, that no longer exists. The imprint from that standpoint is not there, right? Any content, any podcast, anything is no longer out there. And you can only be remembered for one sentence at the end of your life. What would you want that sentence to be?
He did the right thing, even when it was hard.
Mm, it's powerful. I love that, man. So obviously, I wrap up every single interview with the same question. But before we get there, let's get to the important stuff. How do people find you online? How do they work with you? Where's all the information?
Social media, I'm Adam I. Rosen. LinkedIn, Instagram is where I'm most active. X, I had hired someone to do my X. I'm going to be taking that over soon again. So you can probably find me on X soon there too. My website's eocworks.com. And if you guys want to email me, just email me at adam@eocworks.com.
I love it. And like I said, man, I wrap up every single interview with the same question, and that is, in your life, what has been your biggest moment of growth?
Selling my first business because it was not pretty. It was not sexy. It was not what you dream of. It was not lucrative for me. It was nothing positive. It was in my first acquisition financially. But everything of where I am, every reason for where I am today and where I hope to go in my life is due to how I, as well as my co-founder, were able to handle that difficult time of selling the business. Because again, it was not that sexy, pretty exit that any entrepreneur dreams of especially when they dedicate 5 years of their life to something like we did.
Yeah, man. Adam, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your wisdom with my audience, man. This has been great. Thank you.
Justin, thank you, man. Keep up the awesome work.